Looking back 40 years, wow, things sure were different, weren't they? MTV had just burst onto the scene, changing the music game entirely. And Atari? That was the king of gaming, no question about it. We didn't have all this non-stop news hitting us or social media buzzing in our pockets. No. If you wanted to catch up or hang out, you actually had to, see people. Face to face. Friends, family, whoever. It was all about those real, in-the-flesh meetups. Life was a whole lot simpler in a way, don't you think? Oh, let me tell you, back in the 80s, the whole idea of being safe in a car was way more chill than it is today. Like, seatbelts? Half the time, people didn't even bother with them. And it wasn't just about not buckling up, it was a whole different vibe. Kids in the front seat were a common sight, not tucked away in some high-tech safety seat. I mean, it was pretty normal to see a little one sitting right there on a parent's lap, hands on the wheel, pretending to drive. Can you imagine doing that now? You'd have people dialing child services on you before you could even hit the end of the block. And it didn't stop there. The back of a station wagon was practically a playground. No seatbelts, no worries. Just a bunch of kids rolling around every time the car took a turn. And pickups? The bed of a truck was as good as a VIP lounge for us. No one thought twice about piling in the back and cruising around town. It was all part of the fun, feeling the wind in your hair, not a care in the world about safety standards or whatever they call it now. Looking back, it's kind of wild how much things have changed. Safety's a big deal these days, and for good reason, but man, the 80s were a different time, a wild ride in more ways than one. Back in the day, it wasn't a big deal to leave the kids in the car for a quick run into the grocery store. Parents would just crack the windows a bit to keep the car cool and dash in. And kids? We had the run of the neighborhood. You'd be out there for hours, no one hovering over you, keeping tabs every minute. If you wanted to know where everyone was, you just looked for that heap of bikes dumped on someone's front yard. That was the sign that the party was there. Man, childhood felt like a big adventure, pretty much all the time. Oh, back then? You hardly ever saw anyone rocking helmets, knee pads, or elbow pads. Nah, if you took a spill and got a scrape or a bruise, you pretty much wore it like a medal of honor. Show up with a new scratch, and it was like, check this out. Instant street cred with your friends. And when we were out and about, too late or whatever, payphones were our lifeline. Remember those? If you needed a ride, you'd just make a collect call home. Dial up, let it ring once to signal your folks, hey, come get me, then hang up quick to avoid the charges. Oh, smoking? Back then, it was everywhere. I mean, you'd see clouds of smoke in restaurants, offices, even in homes, and nobody batted an eye, even with kids running around. The whole concept of secondhand smoke and its dangers? That was barely a whisper on anyone's radar. And get this, you could walk up to a cigarette machine, pop in some coins, and voila, a pack of cigarettes was yours. No one was there checking your ID or making sure you were old enough. It was just that easy. And if you were too young or just didn't want to go to the machine, you could literally take a note from your folks to the store along with some cash or a check, yes, a handwritten note, and the clerk would sell you cigarettes to bring back home. Can you imagine doing that now? Talking about alcohol and those so-called latchkey kids takes me back. So, here's the deal with alcohol back then. Sure, it wasn't like kids were sitting around knocking back beers or anything, but it wasn't uncommon for parents to let their kids have a tiny sip of their drink if they were curious. It was more of a let's demystify this so you won't be too curious kind of approach. Parents might offer a little taste during a special dinner or holiday, thinking it was better for kids to have that first taste in a safe, family environment rather than sneaking around with their friends. And then there's the whole latchkey kid phenomenon. This term might sound a bit old-fashioned now, but it was a big part of life for a lot of us. With both parents working, many kids were given a key to the house and were expected to fend for themselves for a few hours after school until the parents got home. The golden rule? You had to know how to dial a few important numbers, the home phone, a parent's work number, and maybe a neighbor's in case of an emergency. Being a latchkey kid was like a badge of independence. You walked home, let yourself in, and you had the run of the place until the folks came back. Sure, you had to do your homework and maybe start dinner, but you also had a sense of responsibility and freedom. It was all about trust and learning to take care of yourself, even at a young age. Back in the day, dealing with bad behavior was a whole different ballgame. I mean, parents and teachers weren't shy about using a bit of physical discipline to straighten kids out. A smack on the hand or tapping a ruler on the desk, that was the norm, and it was seen as the way to keep us in line. Crazy, right? And let's talk about peanut allergies. We knew they existed, but it wasn't this big, guarded against thing like it is now. EpiPens? Nah, those weren't hanging around in every school like they are today. Peanuts were just part of the lunch scene. No one was running around waving the allergy flag. Times sure have changed when it comes to discipline and food safety, that's for sure. Oh man, back in the pre-social media days, the mall was the teenage hangout spot. We'd just roll up with our crew and spend what felt like eternity there. It was like our version of social media, you know? Instead of liking posts, we'd be grabbing a burger, hitting the arcade, or just wandering around window shopping. Nowadays, people might mistake it for loitering, but for us, it was the place to be. And let's talk about those chickenpox parties. Classic move. Can you believe it? Parents would intentionally gather their kids with someone who had chickenpox, thinking, hey, might as well get it over with. It was like a weird rite of passage. I guess there was this idea that if you got it early, you wouldn't have to deal with it later in life.